On August 15, 2009, Kuwait faced its gravest civilian tragedy. Sparked by women's jealousy and vengeance against her husband for taking another wife, the incident resulted in several innocent casualties, leaving the country in shock. This tragic event left an indelible impression on Kuwaitis and marked one of the few occasions the nation administered the death penalty to a woman. Let's delve deeper into today's case, the Kuwaiti wedding fire. On August 15, 2009, a Kuwaiti wedding took a devastating turn. Following local customs, over 100 women and children gathered in a separate tent. That evening, the tent suddenly ignited, trapping many within. With the sole exit, panic erupted, causing a stampede. In a mere 3 minutes, 57 women and children lost their lives, and 90 others were injured. Although the initial death toll stood at 42, the number grew over the ensuing months. The extent of burns required forensic experts for victim identification. Investigation revealed the fire was deliberately set, pointing to 23-year-old Nasra Youssef Mohammed al-Enezi as the culprit. Who was Nasra, and what drove her to such a calamity? Nasra Youssef Mohammed al-Enezi, a mother of 2, married her spouse Zayed Safiri, 36, in her late teens. Little is documented about Nasra's early life, but some accounts hint at her mental health challenges. Regrettably, due to mental health stigmatization, Nasra avoided seeking proper care, exacerbating her distress. While Islam emphasizes sound mental well-being, the topic remains stigmatized among many of its followers. Some perceive mental illness as a lack of faith, leading to shame and ostracization. This societal pressure evidently impacted Nasra, who exhibited erratic behavior and struggled with impulsiveness in her daily life. Family and friends often viewed Nasra's marital life with Zayed as harmonious. The couple was blessed with 2 children, Shaka and Muhammad. Like many in traditional households, Nasra was a dedicated homemaker, overseeing the household and childcare, while Zayed earned the family's living. Yet, their domestic life wasn't as happy as it seemed. Both Shaka and Muhammad had mental disabilities, placing added stress on Nasra. Zayed, rather than assisting, often pinned the blame on Nasra for their children's conditions, expressing his disappointment in not having normal offspring. The strain further intensified when Zayed disclosed his intent to marry a second wife. While Nasra disapproved, Zayed remained resolute, drawing from cultural and religious norms permitting polygamy in the Middle East. In Kuwait, polygamy is lawful, though only a minority practice it. According to Islam, Kuwait's predominant religion, men can marry up to 4 women, but they must ensure equitable treatment and resources for each. If a man cannot fulfill these conditions, he is advised to marry just one. Zayed, being affluent, had the means to support another wife. Yet, his motivations appeared grounded less in financial capability and more in his disappointment over Nasra's failure to provide normal children. His decision, seemingly unilateral, disregarded Nasra's feelings on sharing her marital bond with another. As Zayed pursued a second wife, Nasra's anguish intensified. She grappled with the injustice of being blamed for something beyond her control, like the nature of the children God blessed them with. Despite this, Zayed seemed to be effortlessly sidelining her. In a short span, 36-year-old Zayed identified his prospective second wife. They set the wedding in Al-Jarrah, a city 32 kilometers west of Kuwait City. As customary in Middle Eastern nuptials, a grand celebration filled with melodies and feasting was anticipated. However, as Zayed's excitement escalated, Nasra's despair transformed into rage. She felt marginalized and unvalued. Overwhelmed by her emotions, Nasra contemplated revenge. She pondered ways to tarnish Zayed's reputation. To her, disrupting his joyous wedding seemed a fitting retaliation. During Zayed's second wedding, the atmosphere was jubilant. In adherence to tradition, separate tents housed the men and women, providing a space where women could relax without the presence of male guests. Nasra was among the attendees, her genuine emotions masked by a forced smile. As the evening progressed, around 9 p.m., Nasra discreetly exited the tent. Ensuring she wasn't observed, she retrieved a concealed jerry can of gasoline. Intent on exacting revenge on Zayed and his new wife, she planned to set the women's tent ablaze. Unbeknownst to her, several maids spotted her suspicious behavior. Consumed by her intention, Nasra doused the tent with gasoline and struck a match. Flames immediately engulfed the tent. Quickly, she retreated, feigning ignorance. Inside, the celebration's excitement was soon replaced with fear as smoke enveloped the space. Panic ensued as attendees realized the dire situation. But with only one exit, a chaotic scramble resulted, leading to injuries and chaos amidst the flames. The horrifying scene was marked by cries and shouts, a stark contrast to the earlier festivities. Amid the desert's dry heat, flames rapidly consumed the tent. Within minutes, the interior temperature soared up to around 932 degrees Fahrenheit. Men from the adjacent tent and nearby witnesses sensed the danger and swiftly alerted emergency services, but it was tragically too late. By midnight, the once joyful wedding tent was a smoldering ruin. Tragically, many who couldn't escape were trapped and perished in the intense heat and smoke. The final count revealed about 58 fatalities, primarily women and children, and over 90 injured from the blaze or the ensuing chaos. The grim aftermath the following morning was heart-wrenching. The remnants of a once joyous celebration were now a scorched wasteland. Identifying the charred remains became a daunting task, as many were burned beyond recognition. Among the survivors was Zayed's new wife, bearing minor injuries, but sadly, her mother and sister weren't as fortunate. Public outcry grew over perceived delays in emergency responses. In light of the tragedy, the government initiated an investigation, suspecting the cause was more sinister than a mere accident. Forensic teams began identifying victims, while medical specialists from Germany and Britain arrived in Kuwait for treatment of the injured. Upon closer inspection, evidence suggested the fire wasn't accidental. Traces of intentional ignition and accelerants like petrol were found. Suspecting possible vengeance towards Zayed or his new bride, authorities initiated interviews to gather leads. Nasra initially flew under the radar as she showed no overt resentment towards the wedding. However, her facade unraveled when the police interviewed two wedding maids. They recounted seeing Nasra acting suspiciously around the tent, spreading some sort of liquid before the fire erupted. Tracking Nasra down wasn't difficult, as she was still at home caring for her two children. Unexpectedly, she offered a swift confession when confronted by the police. Without seeking counsel, she divulged her motives and the sequence of events that led to the tragedy. On August 16, 2009, the day following the inferno, Nasra was taken into custody. As the gravity of her situation set in, Nasra sought to retract her confession. She explained to the media and law enforcement that she was under immense stress and the trauma of the incident caused her to speak impulsively. Regardless, her words didn't sway the police's belief in her guilt. Colonel Mohammed al-Sabra, the Interior Ministry's spokesperson, publicly stated they had apprehended the individual responsible for the disaster. Charged with premeditated mass murder and arson, Nasra stood trial on October 27, 2009. Throughout her court appearance, she was largely uncommunicative, merely shaking her head and saying no when asked about the charges. Observing her behavior, the judge attempted to encourage her to speak, even offering water. Her defense team, consisting of 3 lawyers, presented a series of serious allegations during the trial. They claimed that Nasra, who they said was 2 months pregnant at the time of her arrest, had been forced to undergo an abortion while in custody due to the actions of a prison guard and an Asian nurse. Among the claims presented by Nasra's defense team was a notable allegation about a prison guard's involvement in her forced abortion. They stated that this guard was a relative of Nasra's husband and had since been relocated away from the prison where Nasra was held. Her legal team argued that under the guise of administering tranquilizers, Nasra had been given drugs that induced an abortion. They believe this was done deliberately, as Kuwaiti law dictates that death sentences for pregnant women are automatically converted to life imprisonment. So, they suspected that the miscarriage was strategically planned to ensure Nasra's execution. In line with this, they requested a medical examination to determine the cause and timing of her miscarriage. Despite these strong allegations, the court dismissed them. On March 10, 2010, Nasra Youssef Mohammed al-Enezi was declared guilty of all charges and was handed the death penalty. Appeals followed, but on June 12, the Supreme Court stood by the appeals court's decision, sealing her fate. This ruling was unprecedented in Kuwait's judicial history, marking the first instance where the highest court confirmed a death sentence for a woman. It's worth noting that in a previous case in 2005, a woman had been given the death penalty for drug trafficking. However, that sentence was later reduced to 15 years of imprisonment by the Court of Appeals. And this decision was ratified by the Supreme Court. The ruling had far-reaching consequences, not just for Nasra and the victims' families, but also for the broader Kuwaiti society. Many in Kuwait were left grappling with a verdict that, while undoubtedly influenced by the heinousness of the crime, was seen by some as dismissive of the possible underlying causes and motives. The fact that the crime was committed by a woman within the context of the country's complex societal norms further intensified the debate. Nasra's defense attorney, Zaid al-Kabaz, strongly criticized the judicial process, arguing that the court seemed to have made its mind up from the start, barely paying heed to the arguments presented by the defense. He implied that the overwhelming public sentiment against Nasra might have biased the court's judgment. To offer a gesture of goodwill and remorse, Zaid proposed that Nasra would pay a condolence fee to the victims' families if the court considered a reduced sentence. The tragedy also sparked intellectual discourse within academic and expert circles. Many sociologists and psychologists believe that the incident should be viewed in the broader context of societal pressures and individual mental health. They argue that the manifold stressors and traumas that drove Nasra to such an extreme act warranted detailed examination. The incident highlighted concerns regarding Kuwait's cultural and societal norms, especially concerning polygamy and the perception and treatment of women. Dr. Abdul Wahab Zafiri, who headed the sociology department at the University of Kuwait, pointed out the potential role of systemic undervaluing and disrespect towards women in culminating in such tragic incidents. On the other hand, Najla al-Naki, an official in the government's Department of Fatwa and Legislation, was of the opinion that upholding the death sentence would serve as a potent deterrent to any woman contemplating such grievous actions in the future. This case was more than a singular act of retribution. It stirred discussions on the need for a more comprehensive and understanding approach to societal issues, especially those affecting women's rights and mental health in Kuwait. The 2009 Kuwait wedding fire remains one of the most devastating incidents in the nation's history. While the act itself was heinous, the aftermath exposed a series of lapses in safety measures that could have prevented or at least minimized the tragic outcome. One of the most glaring oversights was the tent's design. While it had the capacity to accommodate 200 guests, it only had a single exit. This major flaw precipitated the stampede that significantly increased the fatalities. Ever since this tragedy, Kuwait has reportedly banned wedding tents and enforced fire safety measures for events. The banning of wedding tents was a significant move considering the cultural importance and traditional value of these tents in wedding ceremonies. For the people of Kuwait, the memory of that fateful day remains fresh even years later. The hope remains that the souls lost find eternal peace and that their loved ones find the strength to move forward. As we wrap up, let us take a moment to reflect and remember those lost, hoping that such a catastrophe never repeats itself anywhere in the world. That's all for today. Thanks for watching.